All right, today we are here at Stix and Brix. The owner, Mario Scalise, is with us. They do wood-fired pizza. And they also have a variety of different types of pizzas. Mario will go into that. They also serve delicious coffee, and they have smoothies and a number of other things on the menu. Mario, do you want to provide a little bit of context and also correct me where I'm wrong?
Yeah, no, we originally started as a wood-fired pizza place. It's still, I guess, officially the name. We've been trying to transition to Stix and Brix Pizza because we have brought in a couple different styles since the original wood-fired. So yeah, pretty much spot on. We got 3 styles of pizza. We do have coffee, smoothies, salads, sandwiches, and all that.
So before we get into some other questions about your business and yourself a little bit, tell us when you started as a business here and also where you're located.
218 West 33rd Street. We're 2 blocks north of the current home of the White Sox. We opened in 2017, October, November 2017. Been here kind of since then. We originally opened up as dual concept. We had 2 entrances, 2 businesses. One was the Red Line Cafe, which some people still reference us as, and then the other was the Stix and Brix. Over the years, you kind of realize what works, what doesn't, and we've kind of merged into just being Stix and Brix.
Why did you start your business? And also, if you could provide a little bit of context on the Stix and Brix Red Line idea, because I know you in the past you had a concept of those 2 businesses, and how you may have struggled too with like brand presence because of that.
I think it started when I was a little boy. When I was younger, I kind of made a decision that I don't think I would ever be able to work for anybody else. So I think it was always in my mind, I'm going to have my own business. I'm going to be a business owner. Like, that just has to happen some way, some shape or form. So everything I ever did was always kind of geared towards working alone. Even when I worked for somebody else, I always kind of wanted to do things my own way. This opportunity, the building's in our family. It was an empty space that's just been sitting here for a while. And it was actually my dad who was throwing out, let's utilize the space, utilize the space. And then over the years, I've always kind of just had an idea of a kind of like a dual concept place. And then I looked at this space with the 2 entrances with, there's a brick wall in the middle. And I always kind of thought, okay, if there's a dual concept place, this could be it, because you could have, the back of house is a shared space. And then you have the dividing wall that kind of allows you to do 2 different businesses at once. And then at that point, it was just, okay, what could work? And the pizza end came from, I went to Arizona, and there's a pizza place called Pizzeria Bianca. They've been around for a long, long time, and probably largely considered one of the best pizza places in the country. They were a wood-fired pizza place, and I was kind of amazed. I was originally amazed that it was like a 2-hour wait, and we waited 2 hours, sat down, and got the pizza in probably like 10 to 15 minutes. And it just blew me away. Like the fact that you have a 2-hour wait and you're able to get somebody in and out, realistically, if they want, in 15 minutes. And then I just started doing the numbers, like, holy shit, like how much turnover that they're having on those tables. And then I really liked pizza, so kind of like pizza always kind of stuck in my head. And then that concept always stuck in my head, because I think when they originally opened, they had 1 location, or they had their main location, and then they took the space next door and they kind of turned it into like a little bar area. So when people were waiting, they would go next door and they would have a drink or have whatever. So it's like I don't know, it's almost like you created a business next door to complement the business that you had. So that was the original idea. It didn't quite work out that way, strictly from the Red Line side. Didn't kick off quite like I was hoping for. We would, when you're dealing with pizza, the margins are great. The margins are great. You could go and you could charge $10, $15, $20. When you're talking about coffee, while the margins are good, it's still ultimately $3, $4. So you have to have volume. And I knew there was some reservations going into it, because we're not in a high traffic area. And a lot of people think, oh, you're right by the train, because we're 2 blocks or a block and a half away from the Red Line. But I think that only works when you're getting off the train. And I knew that. So previously I was at Dunkin' for a long, not so fun 8 years. But when I was there and I would go to other stores, like I realized that the stores that were relying on people going to the train for work, it was a struggle because no one's going to go on a train and sit on a train for 30 minutes standing up in the middle of rush hour with a cup of coffee or anything.
Especially if they're in a rush too.
Yeah. So, but when you get off the train, all right, I'm a block away from work. I got time. So I think I kind of realized, and I kind of had a feeling for that, but wasn't completely sure. And I think we realized that pretty soon. And then it was kind of really hard to kind of get that volume. So we would have our regular customers, but you never got past that. And then the pizza took off from a quality standpoint, like that was there from the beginning. You know, we had our inconsistencies on the coffee end. We're on the pizza end. I think from the very beginning we've been pretty much consistent, and I think that kind of helped drive the business going forward.
So you told me the background of how you got interested in this type of business and the pizza in general, because I was going to ask you, how did you even land on wood fire and learn about it? Because there's an incredible learning curve to anything you do, right? Like we just make hot dogs, and to everyone else, we just make hot dogs, but we have a whole logistical operation that goes into it. Same thing with pizza. And you were so heavily involved in the past with running Little League Baseball.
Yeah.
You were running the league, you were taking care of the fields, you were managing the Dunkin'.
Yep.
And to go from that to wood fire pizza at your own brick and mortar, it almost doesn't make sense. So like, how did you go from that to this? I understand the inspiration of Arizona, but what was the learning curve involved? How did you start learning how to make pizza? You know what I mean? You put out a good product, but what went into that?
I think I've never been one where I could like be taught something. I always kind of had to wing it. Everything I've pretty much ever done, I've always just kind of like had to figure out through trial and error. So with this, I really like pizza, and my mindset was, all right, I'm gonna figure it out. We wood fired came in because I was thinking, okay, we're on the south side of Chicago. There's not a single wood fired pizza in the area, and there may be, like, from a business sense, in hindsight, there may be a reason for that because we don't have people lining up at the doors for it, and there are people who are more of your typical Southsider who probably never even had or even heard of wood-fired pizza, so they immediately stick to the traditional tavern style. So I think that's definitely been probably one of the obstacles we've had. But that was the original thought. It was, okay, there's nothing like it on the South Side. I think there's literally one other pizza place on the South Side. You're going way down to Hyde Park that has wood-fired pizza, and even then, they're more traditional Neapolitan. So I think that was kind of the thing, and then from there, I figured out the oven, or the company that I was going to use for the oven that we have is Muyani. They're based in San Francisco. They allow you to like go on site, do a demo, see the oven, kind of get an idea of how that operates. And then I think they were even offering to like offer support beyond that. But what I did was, my brother, I think a neighbor of his brother, had a pizza truck. I don't think he's no longer doing it, but his name was Giuseppe, and he had a pizza truck called, I think it was called the Pizza Boss. It was like, it's not long ago, but I can't remember the full name. He had a pizza truck. My brother mentioned it to me, and I was like, okay, I'd like to bring somebody in on like a consulting basis to like kind of help get it going.
He was doing wood fire pizzas on the truck?
On the truck. So kind of like, obviously you guys had the trailers, right. You know, he was doing that. Because I think I knew, like, all right, if I could just get a baseline, I felt like I would be able to figure it out, which is kind of stupid in a way, right? Because you're just kind of throwing yourself into it. But I never had his pizza before, and I didn't even necessarily approach him. I was like, okay, I'm going to go in as a customer, like kind of like undercover. I wanted to try it before I even introduced myself. So I grabbed the pizza, I drove it home, and I tried it, and it was maybe like a 15-minute drive from wherever he was at, because he was kind of bouncing around the city from like brewery to brewery or whatever. And I was like, I'm like coming from a food truck. It was really good. And I was just thinking, like, there's no temperature control. Like, there's so many things. Like, I admire the way you guys work just because I know how hard it is just from doing it a couple times with you guys. To see the end product was like, okay, that's impressive. So my mindset was like, okay, if he could help me kind of bring what he's doing to a brick and mortar in a controlled environment, like that could be the foundation to kind of go forward. So I reached out to him. I asked him if he would be interested in kind of consulting, and he did. He came on board, helped cure the oven, because the curing of the oven when you first get the oven is a little bit of a process. I think I probably could have figured it out myself, but it was nice to have someone who's already done it. And he kind of he got us going with the recipe for the dough, and just the initial kind of, it was kind of good to have that support. And then from there, I think we've tweaked the recipe at that point. And then even since then, we've tweaked it even more. So I think now it's kind of more of our own thing, but there was definitely a foundation with him being involved.
So when you say curing oven, you're referring to the wood fire oven.
Yes. Yeah. So
what does curing oven even mean?
And it's all made of bricks, right? Like what we see.
Yeah,
Like,
it's. I'm not sure like the actual. It's like what, I think it's like a refired brick, but it takes, when you're first getting the oven, it takes, I want to say, like several days to get it going, because you can't just light it up. Like right now, in the morning, it's about 350, 400 degrees in the morning. We could start the oven, scorch it, and we're fine. It's going to get to 600, 700, 800 degrees. There's no problem. But in the beginning, when the oven is effectively just 70 degrees and it hasn't been like tested, you can't just do that, because you'll end up breaking or cracking the oven. Kind of get it to like 150, 200 degrees, and the next day,
so it's like
every single day you're kind of slowly getting it to the higher temps, the higher temps.
Nothing happens.
Yeah, and it's just curing it too. I think I think it's almost slowly getting the oven ready to get to that higher temp.
To be able to do it fast.
Yeah,
Okay.
without damaging it. Because when you're dealing with these high temps, and you'll, like, if you look in our oven, you'll see little cracks that have happened. When we first got our first crack in the oven, I was like, holy shit. I'm like, you spend $8,000, $9,000 on an oven, and you see the crack, but then when you look into it, it's pretty common.
At what point is it not common and you're in trouble?
Well, I think for places that have been around for a long time, you could cause it yourself. When we went to Muyani in San Fran, the guy who was teaching us the oven, he had stories where people were buying the oven, and then within a year or whatever, they're calling him and they're saying, the oven's cracking, and then he would go, and at one point, I think he literally said he saw people like winging, like throwing wood in the oven. Like, you're not supposed to throw it in the oven. You're just stupidity. You're going to crack it. You have to kind of place it. You got to put the wood on the floor, get the oven peel, and gently place it in the oven. And then if you have a smaller piece, you could probably gently throw it in the oven. But usually what I'll tell anybody, like newer people who are working here, it's like, you don't do that. I get to do that. You don't get to do that. You have to go, you have to use the peel, you have to gently kind of place it onto the andurin, because the cracks will happen. And there will come a time where the cracks will get bigger. And I think that's kind of natural. And then there's eventually you may have to replace, not necessarily the oven, but I think there are people who will go into the oven, even though it's a small opening, and they kind of repair it. But I think we're a long ways from that.
So you mentioned that the oven gets up to like 700 degrees. Is that common for cooking pizza, or is that wood fire specific?
For wood-fired, traditionally wood-fired pizza is Neapolitan pizza. We don't do Neapolitan pizza. So Neapolitan pizza, you're cooking at a much higher temp, sometimes even up to 900 degrees. Even the way you do the dough is slightly different. The way you stretch the dough is slightly different. And it's quick. It's like 90 seconds. You're throwing it in the oven. You're rotating it. You're going to get the crust nice and risen. You're going to see like the leopard burning on the outside. You're taking it out. It's good, but to me, it's not like a fully cooked pizza. It's very, very quick. What we do, and we didn't necessarily go into it. It was like when we opened, my mindset wasn't, we're not going to do Neapolitan. I like Neapolitan. I was fine with going with whatever was going to work. So, and we actually had it was a little bit of a debate in the beginning between a couple of people who were working. One of them wanted the oven really, really hot, and let's get the pizzas in and out. And then the other guy was, no, let's keep the oven lower and let's cook it slower. And I was kind of like, The business side of me was, yeah, let's get the oven really, really hot and let's get as many pieces out as possible. But then when I started seeing the process of cooking it slower, you see the end result, and it's like, you know what, this is a much better product than the Neapolitan way. And that's kind of, it's literally how that kind of happened. So we do it we're like at 700 degrees. It takes us 3 to 4 minutes. We stretch it slightly different. We're not necessarily focusing on like a big puffy crust, because you'll even notice if you ever see anybody do a Neapolitan pizza, they're kind of pushing everything out to the outside, like everything. So the middle of the pizza is super, super thin and kind of frail. And if you ever had Neapolitan pizza, you'll notice you'll pick it up and it kind of just like flops. That's partly because of that, and then also it's not staying in the oven for very long. We won't stretch it quite like that. We try to make it a little bit more stable in the middle so that when you're picking the pizza up, it's gonna flop, but not as much. And then obviously cooking, it'll solidify a little bit more than a traditional place.
You talked about those two types of pizzas, but here at Stix and Brix, you serve a few different kind, right? You have wood fire, you have beer dough, and you have the super thin crust, like tavern style, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about those three, how they got added to the menu? Yeah. And then also what was the business decision behind them, and how do they change in terms of flavor?
So when I first was like, when I ever looked at pizza places that like had multiple styles, I always kind of questioned it. Like, why would you do that? Because I've been to places that had multiple styles, and one style usually sucks. Like if you go to Lou Malnati's and you have their thin pizza, it's awful. And it's mind-boggling because it's like, I think their deep dish is really good. I think a lot of people do. Like, how do you make one thing so good and then this is just awful? And I think there's a lot of pizza places that I've gone to that have done, or even might be restaurants, right? You might have a restaurant that specializes in a very certain item, and now they go completely off topic, and it's not anywhere near the same quality. So I was always kind of against it. At the same time, it's like you're in business and you're in business to make money. And as I mentioned before, you're in the south side of Chicago. There are people who look at wood-fired pizza as, bougie and too fancy for them. So I was thinking like, okay, what kind of pizza can we do that could be a little more approachable for like a standard south side, but also unique, so it's not just. And then it was beer dough. Beer dough kind of came to be. There was another pizza place that actually incorporates beer in their dough, Bob's Pizza in Pilsen. They have like a few locations now. I don't know if it's old style. I think they use old style. And then my thing was, okay, well, what if I could take that idea? Obviously, I don't know the recipe, so I did my own recipe using the wood-fired oven and kind of cooking it that way. So we started doing it. We were doing it in the wood-fired oven. We realized pretty soon, because it was a thicker pizza and it was a bigger pizza, because that was the one thing too, we didn't want to just do another 10-inch pizza, because so we figured, okay, we'll make this 12 inches, we'll make it a little bit bigger, it'll be more filling, it'll be more for maybe multiple people. And then we started cooking the oven and realized, because of the high temperature of the oven, we had to keep it as far away from the fire as possible, which makes it hard because you only have like 2 spots that you could cook a pizza in. So now we're like trying to get this pizza in the oven, and at the time we were also cooking, obviously, our wood-fired pizza. We were cooking sandwiches in the oven. We're cooking all these other things. It just became, we made it more complicated. That's when we bought a Pizza Master oven, which is the electric oven we have now. And that was an investment. And that was an investment to help make the beer dough, but then it was also an investment to help us with catering orders.
So how did you decide that the beer dough was worth it enough to keep on the menu? To make you basically go from Stix and Brix wood fire to Stix and Brix?
I think I'm very I lack a lot of confidence when it comes to like the final product. So I ask people constantly and I try to gauge if someone's bullshitting me. I don't know if you ever had if you ever ask anybody, oh, how was it? Do you ever gauge okay, are they giving me an honest? Because sometimes people are just nice, right? You go and you ask them, oh, how is it? They're like, oh, it's great. And it's like, no, it's not. I want to know like if something's not good. So I was constantly just, having people try it and just, it's kind of a creepy thing, but I'll be in the back and I'm like looking and like watching the customers eat. No one's gonna want to come in here now because they're gonna like just picture me staring at them from the kitchen. Yeah. And I would just kind of like watch because you want to see the general reaction. Because if you go up to a table, they might just say great, but when you're eating and you're not paying attention, your facial expression is going to tell you if you like it. Not that someone's going to be going, oh my god, but you could tell people's reaction based on how they're interacting. And I always do that. I try not to do it for too long because I don't want to come off like a creep, but I'll do it just to kind of gauge people's genuine response. And people seem to like it. It was funny. There were people who would try it and they'd be like they don't want to hurt my feelings. They're like, oh, I like this better than the other one, and it's just like I make both, so it like doesn't hurt my feelings. Yeah, like
you just want to know.
Yeah, like I want like it's gonna make me feel good either way. And if it's not good, I want to know because if I don't know that information, I can't be better.
Right.
Yeah, that's anything, right? So we realized people were liking it. Not that it was necessarily selling big time, and I think that's where the wood fire becomes a problem for us because I think people will forever kind of look at us as just a wood-fired pizza place, which is why we're trying to switch to Stix and Brix pizza.
Yeah,
and I even like classified you as that, right? Because it's like, oh, that's your specialty, but it makes sense too why you would be trying to get away from it.
Because from an outsider, they're just immediately thinking, because people will come in and they immediately think everything is wood-fired. They think the Beardo, they think the tavern is wood-fired. It's like, no. But yeah, we brought it on because we know it was different. We were able to put a little bit more heavier cheese. It's a little more filling. And then we just kind of kept it on. We brought the electric oven in for that reason, but also for catering.
When you say for catering, you mean in terms of volume?
Yeah, like we would get, like we had one order, and it was right around the same time we had an order for Chicago Fire, the TV show. And we'll get, every once in a while, we'll get orders from them. We're not like official vendor or anything like that, but we got like an 85 or 90 pizza order from them that they wanted to place. They were giving us in advance. And I was like, okay, there's no way I can make 90 pieces in a wood-fired oven without it traveling and coming off like it's just going to be garbage. It's not a pizza you really travel with. But then when we got the electric oven, we were able to do that because we're able to make, smaller pizzas, and they're not wood-fired, but they're, cooked in an electric oven. At that point, we could probably fit 20, 30 pieces at a time. And for a catering order, you can kind of get that out.
I'm sure you have plenty of them because, we have in either direction. But is there a notable time throughout the period of Stix and Brix where you were like, this sucks, it's incredibly hard, and maybe I'm not going to quit, but like, I really want to some days?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think if you own, I think if you own a business, you kind of run through that all the time. But I think if you own a restaurant, that's constantly in your mind. But I think like it's funny, like that struggle, it's like part of the process that kind of makes it worthwhile in a way. You know what I mean? Like I'll be frustrated some days. It's funny, like I could be frustrated, like I could go home and I could just think like, oh my God, this sucks, whatever. But I still enjoy it, like in a weird, like demented way. Like I still enjoy the struggles that come with it. So last year, like going into last year, there was a point where it was like, all right, you got to shit or get off the pot. Like when we opened in 2017. The general rule of thumb is, it'll take 2 years before you're kind of in a process where you're starting to break even, and then 5 years before your business is kind of established. We went into 2019 and it was doing well. Like 2019 was doing pretty well, like kind of where I was expecting it to go. We still had a lot of work to do, but I felt like we were in the right direction. And then, we all know what happened after that, right? COVID came and it just kind of was like, it screwed everybody up. So we're not like alone in that. Everybody struggled with that to some extent, but obviously when you are a dine-in restaurant, you definitely got hit. And that was mostly our business. Our business the focus here was strictly dine-in. We opened up in 2017. I didn't let people even take out pizza. Like we didn't have to-go boxes.
Right.
So somebody would call and they'd be like, can I get a pizza to go? No. And my reasoning for that is, one, I knew the pizza didn't travel well, but I also didn't want that pizza to go out, somebody to eat it, not realizing that they just had a wood-fired pizza on a 30-minute drive and it's going to taste cold, and now they're leaving a bad review. Because I'm probably maybe a little bit too self-conscious of reviews, and I didn't want that to be like the start of it. So when that happened, like that sucked. And then like since then, the business has changed so much to where we don't do as much dine-in. And then I think it's, so last year, going into last year was kind of like, all right,
Do you allow the wood fire pizza to be carry out now?
yes.
Okay.
Now we do. Now we kind of let everything, I mean, you have no choice, right? If you're a restaurant, you can't just be strict on just dine-in only. I think there's even fine dining places that are they'll do takeout, delivery, like it's just the way the world is. So going into last year was kind of like, all right, we have to kind of figure this out. And as the year went on, that's when we did like a little renovation over the winter break, and we moved some things around because it was kind of like we either have to make the place efficient, or I don't think I was ever going to leave the business, but I think the business would have to change to some extent. So I was thinking like, is it closing down and going somewhere else? Is it closing down and maybe partnering with, I was going through all things. Like, what if I went to a bar that didn't have food and say, hey, let's partner and, or there's multiple ideas. Or what if I just did pop-ups, or, there was a few things that kind of came. But being able to do this renovation allowed us to just be way more efficient, to where now I've always loved doing this, but this is probably the first time. This is the first time, like my dad always says, like, do you always see a light at the end of the tunnel? And this is probably the first time you could actually say, yeah, there's like a light. There's an end to it, because I know we have a much better chance of being profitable now than we did a year ago.
And why? Why is that? So you made some renovations, right? The oven used to be on the other side.
Yes.
You used to have these two storefront kind of things going on.
Yeah.
You brought the oven over here. You did some changes. Can you talk about that and why it's going to be potentially more profitable for you?
So we originally had the oven on the other side because we had two entrances. One side was for pizza, one side was for the red line. When, as I mentioned, the red line kind of flailed, we started to just push everything to one door, and COVID definitely pushed that. So we went from two entrances to one entrance. So everybody was coming in on one side, but we still had the oven on the opposite side of the restaurant. So where all the transactions are taking place are on, the southeast end of the restaurant. All the cooking's happening on the northwest end of the restaurant. And it's not like the restaurant's huge, but it's enough space to just inconvenience from a working standpoint. So we went from needing, up to 4 people to work to cover the space. Now we're down where we can even function as little as 2. And when you're getting in, in the restaurant, when you're able to cut your labor in half almost at some points of the day, it's a huge savings.
So was the goal there strictly to cut down on unnecessary costs by increasing efficiency, which results in more profit? Because you had mentioned before, we even started recording, that you were saving a few thousand already.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed a difference on a weekly basis. Are we saving, over 1,000 just compared to last year in labor? And it's not one of those things where it's just like, getting rid of people. We've kept like the core. Like my whole thing is I would rather have fewer workers and take care of them more than have a bunch of workers that you're paying, peanuts. And you're, and you're just kind of like, revolving door and churning through people. So we have a smaller staff, but they work their asses off. They're versatile. They're
Well trained.
Yeah. So yeah, we've done that, but I think it's also because it's a more efficient operation. I think it's just going to allow us to be able to do more as we go forward, and then even transforming the space that used to be where the oven was into now an event space. Our goal is to try to be able to really kind of go into that, because I think, and I would say most restaurant owners would agree, and I think this applies for you guys too, right? The day-to-day is such an unknown. You can't rely on that. You can't rely on your day-to-day. I think for most restaurants, their day-to-day best case, I mean, fine dining may be different, but their day-to-day is like you break even. You hope to break even. Everything else, the catering and the events, that's where I think that's where the real money comes into play for most places. And I think I'm no different.
I think that's interesting. It's an interesting concept because for Mike and I, we were saying if our permit spot that we have with the Chicago Park District were to work and take off, that would be more lucrative than going around and doing all of these events, because these events are finite with the products we're selling. Like, we're all selling like products that are relatively commoditized, right? Like, you can only charge so much for a pizza, a hot dog, breaded steak, whatever it is. So if we're going to these places, we're only going to make a few thousand max, 1,000 max, 500 max. And if it's a vending thing, we're transacting, we're taking a risk of going all the way to this location, maybe making the money, maybe not. But it's a different mindset when you kind of speak of the same thing, but from your brick and mortar. The ability to cater also is almost unlimited. Like, if 100 orders were just coming in of catering things that you had to go deliver, that would be great. But if you had to take your whole operation to them, it's finite, and there's only so many days available, only so many hours in a day. And we kind of see it in reverse, because our catering is different. It's not like orders are flowing through into our trailer, we're just in one spot and dishing out food. Versus in the brick and mortar, it's like that is an avenue to make more money, because it's almost infinite, even though you would have constraints with labor and supplies and stuff. But
Yeah.
Plus the accommodations that can change, right? So like at our spot, we have our guaranteed electricity that is built to fit our truck and stuff, right? Even like when you go somewhere like the brewery, for example, you were able to plug into their electricity, which is nice, and you know it's going to serve the needs of those ovens and everything you need. But if you when we do the Nature Fest, right? And you have to run off of gas, or you have to, a generator or whatever. You have a lot more variables you're putting into it, which is nice though, in the sense that something like that, you're vending, you could have unlimited volume, but you still have to deal with the variables that come with something like that, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, because if you're one of those businesses where the line is always out the door, like, whether you like the restaurant or not, like if it's a Portillo's or a McDonald's or a Rick Benny's in the area, right? Like, they always have a line. Like, there's always people around. And it's almost like, why wouldn't I take that every day,
Right.
than go struggle and do these things, completely somewhere else and maybe fail? So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting point, because you're totally right, though.
Something I would say about that, it's cool the impression you can give people when you're able to create a high quality product on their premises or at their event, right? So like when we talked about the wedding, the way you talked about, but in terms of how impressed people were that, like, oh, you're making cheeseburgers? We had the cart inside the venue, and they're like, you're making cheeseburgers fresh right here? Like, they don't realize what's capable, or when you bring the right equipment and you have a very condensed operation, that we are making cheeseburgers. We're grilling them right in front of them. We're steaming the hot dogs and the buns right in front of them. But also, like, it's very well organized and kept, that they're just not sure that, or they don't get that initial impression. But the fact that you can do that on site, the fact that you can make a pizza right in front of them, also has a nice air to it too, right? So it's trying to find that balance.
Yeah, and for us, we've done some mobile events, not nearly as many as you guys, and I see I respect the amount of work that you guys put into it, because a few times we've done it, to me, I was like, holy shit, it's a lot of work. Like, and I think it's obviously becomes a little bit harder for us. You guys have kind of been through the gauntlet, right? You guys have been doing it for so many years. This is your life. For me, when I'm doing it, it's kind of like I'm trying to figure it out as I go. So everything, like the prepping and everything, just takes a little bit longer. But yeah, you're right. Like in our case, our day-to-day, it would be nice to be busy, but it would still be very unpredictable. Like if you told me you're gonna be busy from the time we open to the time we close, that's great, but there's still gonna be unpredictability on what someone's gonna order. But when you're doing an event, right, if you're doing, for us, if we're doing a catering order, all right, they're ordering in advance, X amount of pizzas, all right, we know what it is. If we're doing a party, they're ordering, we know what they're ordering. It's so much easier for us to do a catering or an event, an in-house event, than it is for us to deal with the day-to-day. Even if the sales are equal, that event is just more profitable from a workload standpoint. Where for you guys, it's probably the opposite, because if you guys are in a stationary, spot.
there's liability on the road, there's equipment breaking down, when there's always something in disarray, like when we go into the trailer. We actually just got our fire suppression inspected. They mounted this new fire extinguisher in this like a very convenient place. We pull up, park in our spot, it's already off the wall. It's like you're traveling, there's always something wrong. And so we're like, well, if our permit spot, where is like our brick and mortar section, right? If that just had a line out the door, which who doesn't want a line going down the block all the time, then that would be more convenient than doing some of these other events where you might make the same money, yet you're traveling to a location that has, is a mile away, has electricity as a resource, like all of these different things that enable you to, in a spot where it's like people know you're there because you've been there for 5 years. And no one has to guess what you're going to have. And
no. It's like, to me, obviously starting a food truck or a food trailer, in which you guys have, the plus side to it, right, is the startup cost compared to a restaurant is significantly less. And then you're able to kind of go where people are, right? But the downside is it's grueling. It's grueling work. So to me, the natural transition is like, all right, you start a food trailer, you start a food truck, and then if it goes really, really well, you can maybe transition to like a brick and mortar. Right. When people do a brick and mortar, then they transition to mobile, like, that doesn't make sense to me.
I'm still trying to make it make sense as well for people, but
I think something else we talk about it too is like menu diversity, though, because you talk about how it can be unpredictable. If you had on a normal operation here, if you have a line down the block and you make good money at the end of the day, but you don't know if like that's going to be 10 thin thins, 20 beer doughs, and maybe 20 pasta orders. That's very unpredictable on how you're going to service that, the logistics behind it, the inventory you're going to run through. Right? You were telling me about you had a really good lunch hour and you're making an extra dough because you thought you might run out. And then it slowed down, but imagine if it didn't even slow down, but all the busyness then transitioned to pasta and sandwiches for some reason. All that dough you made might not work for that, or will not work the next day. And then also you're running out of your rolls that you house make, right? So we always struggle through the menu, right? Or just have a menu diversity. Like, let's offer all these things because you never know what people are going to buy, and you want them to come to you no matter what they're feeling. But then you're actually making your operation and the overhead harder, right? So the thing about our private events are actually fun is when we can limit our menus, right?
Yeah.
Because we get to, it's obviously in concert with the people that are having us, but we can say, okay, this is going to only be hot dogs and burgers, or we're going to a brewery. We're like, okay, this is just sausages and brisket, or.
And for us, if you know how to tax certain segments and you know the events you want to be vending at, of course it's worth it. When we did the Christmas event in December, we made over $1,000 every day for a total of 3 hours of vending each day. So that's pretty good. Like, some restaurants are open all day, right? And if it's a bad day, you might not make that. We're going to where there's 1,000+ people, and there's only 3 vendors, 2 of them being food, and we're able to rake in some dough that way. But not every event is like that. And not every event turned out the way the person who acquired you says it's going to turn out. So
Cars and Culture, for example.
Yeah, like Cars and Culture was supposed to have thousands of people. There was maybe a couple
they also
hundred.
had to move it from their original date.
Yeah.
The weather was bad on the original date. They moved it because they thought it would turn out better, but it moved it to later in the year, and it was just a bust. Even the organizers, contacted us and said, hey, this was a bust from what we expected. Here's free entry to the spring, thing we'll put on, But and then conversely, just circle back to the Moody event we did, we ran out of potatoes, right? We talked about that. But if that same thing happened here, it's possible we have potatoes in our storage, right? And we run all half a mile away, grab more potatoes, and bring them back. So it's like the security of knowing all your extra inventory is very close to you.
Right.
Is something nice too, right?
That's a trade-off. I mean, yesterday we ran out of roasted tomatoes over the weekend, and then Tuesday morning. So we close on Monday. So Tuesday morning, it's a heavy prep day, and I usually come in but I'm also doing bread and whatever. We got cherry tomatoes in the morning, and then you're kind of getting close to opening, and then you're opening, and then you realize, shit, we still gotta do the roasted tomatoes, but they're here. So it's, you cut them up, you can do a small batch, you get it done. You're not, you're not off site.
So going back to when I even asked you, like, this is kind of how this kicked off on a tangent, but you had said last year was really time to shit or get off the pot. Like, what happened? Was it COVID that made you have these second guesses about what was going on at your business? Or was it something specific in like 2021 or 2022 where you were like, man, like, what's happening here?
I think when I opened it, I think like running a restaurant could be such like it could fuck with your mind. When you open, it's like you need you need workers to take care of customers, and you need customers, or you need workers and the product to be able to take care of the customers, but you need the customers to be able to buy the product and the workers. And I think when I opened up, I didn't want to be fully busy because I didn't want to not be ready for it and then have, a lot of restaurants, they open up and they're busy and they're slammed from the beginning, but they're disorganized and they're awful. So I didn't want that. But then I was also staffing and prepping as if we were going to be busy. So it's like, and then I think from there, it was just kind of like, I just dug myself a hole in the beginning. And then I ultimately was looking to be a dine-in only place. And then COVID came, and then obviously that changed. And I think just that transition to not being that dine-in only establishment, I think that just took a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it was like ultimately from the time we opened, it was probably the first 18 months I didn't get paid. So I came into the business, I saved a lot of money, and my thing was like, all right, I'm not gonna get paid. Like, I should be the last one paid. The workers gotta get paid. It's gonna take time. But I figured, all right, if I could not get paid for the first year, 2 years, but then things will kind of settle in and I'll be able to do that. Then it never fully happened. Like, I started getting paid, but it was kind of like, I'm taking money, but it's at this expense. You're not able to maybe do advertising that you want, or you're not able to maybe staff appropriately. So it's like, yeah, I'm getting paid, but now I'm working 70 hours,
You start questioning your own reinvestment goals, right? Like,
Yeah,
at what time you can pay yourself, but you're like, oh, I might want to make these changes, or I might buy this equipment. And then it's like, oh, do I grow or do I pay myself?
Yeah. And then you do, like, you'll do certain things to try to grow. You'll do certain advertising things, and then it fails. And the thing is, when you're doing an advertising thing, you're not just losing the money in an advertisement, but maybe you staffed a little bit extra, anticipating you might be busy. You prep a little bit more, anticipating you might be busy, and then it doesn't happen. So now it's like, mentally, it's like
double the loss.
It's triple the loss, because there's three things that you just lost out on. So now when the next opportunity comes, you're like gun shy to make that decision, and before you know it, it's just, you kind of, like I said, you just dig yourself into this hole.
Constantly, questioning if you should do something, even though it's probably the right thing to do, but there's a lot of risk involved in it.
Yeah.
But it's probably always the right thing to do. But you're like, I want to live.
Yeah. So it gets hard. So it came to a point where, like I said, I went in last year and I'm like, okay, like, COVID's, ending or whatever. Like, it's not, what it was. And it's like, all right, this is it. We got to kind of figure it out. And then I kind of realized that there's no way the operation as is, there's no way it's going to happen. I kind of came to the conclusion, like, this area, there's only so much potential from a day-to-day basis here. But then I think, like, okay, if I would have got up and moved, right, the investment of starting another restaurant,
Right.
The average restaurant is going to cost at least $500,000 at least. It's like, okay, I can't do that. So I have this here. What can we do to make the changes, to be more efficient, to put us in a position where we could make money on the day-to-day? And then now when we do catering at events, now it's because before it was, if we didn't have a catering order, if we didn't have an event, we weren't making money. Like, that's it. So on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, however you want to do it, if we didn't have, I would say on a weekly basis, if we didn't have either a big catering or an event, the week was pretty much wasted. And it's like, you can't function in that.
Yeah. And actually feel like you're enabled to do some things that, make the business go to the next level.
And it's hard because mentally it drains you, right? Because that's all you're thinking about. You're trying to survive, and you're not necessarily trying to grow.
Right.
Right. So now
It's that fight or flight versus like being able to think outside the box, think critically about how to solve some problems.
because your mind gets clear when finance, like, I'm not doing this for the money. Like, I'm doing this because I do truly love doing this, and I've always been in my mindset. Anything I've ever done in my life, it's always been do what you love. I don't understand people who like work a job that they hate and they're making a shit ton of money doing it, and it's like, yeah, you could do that, but you should do what you love. So my whole thing was, I love doing this. I don't care if I'm as long as I make enough money for me to be comfortable, I'm fine. I don't have to make millions. But you do need money.
Yeah.
So
You
it's like when
literally need money for
you
the-
literally
for
need
you and
money
the business
to survive. So it's like you need to make money at the same time.
Is it a hobby or is it a business?
Yeah, and it's just so it's like you have to you kind of go through those the mind your mind just kind of goes through it because you're trying to make money and I think when you're trying to survive, I don't think you're open, like your mind is not thinking clearly because you're kind of like in your thoughts,
Right,
you
all
know,
the time.
like all the time. But if you're at a point where your business is able to make money in the day to day, it just I don't know, I think it just, and I'm not even at that point yet because we literally just been doing this for a few weeks, but your mind just opens up and now you're just, all right, I know I'm going to make money today. I know I'm going to make money today. I'm not going to lose money.
So how could I do it better?
How can I make money tomorrow? You know, it's not, all right, what can I do today to pay the bills?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think majority of the people, whether they run a business or with their personal finances, tend to live that way, and that's why we have a lot of different issues in our society. One thing that I was going to ask you too is, how do you navigate the scheduling here? Like you mentioned, today's my early morning, but so and so's early on the next day. Like as two people coming from a mobile food trailer, we're barely getting in our feet with like other workers and trying to get new people on board. Especially with our setup being, you only need two people in there really.
Yeah.
So with you going to 4 to 6 workers at once, to 2 to 4 at once, like how do you manage these people and get a grasp on the scheduling for your own personal
And to add a little
yeah.
color to that too is, as you answer, if you ideally were just arbitrarily whatever the number is, that you didn't have to be on that schedule. You were replaced by your early day, which wasn't necessary. You just didn't need to be here. I mean, you would still watch, you still manage, but you just could replace yourself because the money allowed it. Would that be a thing as you're answering the initial schedule and stuff?
See, that's hard because like I think I'm a worker. And it's right. This is what they're saying. Like you work for your business, or what? You let the business work for you, or whatever,
Work
right?
on it per se.
Yeah, and I don't think I'll ever be able to be the owner who's not doing work. Like I don't think I'll ever be able to be that person. I kind of, from a financial end, I wish I was, but I don't think I would be happy. Like if I was just sitting back and I was just being like an owner on the laptop, just like I don't think I'd be able. I don't think I would enjoy doing that.
You'd like it to be a complete choice, right? Because like right now, honestly, it's probably not a choice, right? But if it was a choice because financially
Yes.
you could,
Yes.
then okay. Also, if you want to take a 2-week vacation, or if
I could do that. Yes.
3 days, you just don't even stop in here, and it's still gonna run on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I probably would just because I enjoy being here. But yeah, like that's I think no matter what, I will always have to, if it's doing dough or shit, sometimes I enjoy just washing dishes. Like
Right.
it's stupid because from a business sense, it doesn't make sense. But for me, I think one, I enjoy it. And two, I think it's important when you're having people, you want to show them that you're in the trenches with them, that it's not kind of like you're standing above them telling them what the fuck to do. And I've seen people work like that, and I've had workers come in who talk about previous, restaurants even where their owners were like that, where they're not even there, they're not even actively even there. And I never want to be that person. But I think also like you could also hold somebody accountable because you can't go and be on somebody for something that you can't do yourself. Like that's how I look at it. Like if I'm washing dishes, then well you're washing dishes too. If I could sweep, you could sweep. If whatever it is, I think it's a little bit easier to
relate.
and I think
to pass the buck because you do the buck too.
Yeah, as opposed to just being somebody who is so detached. Like that was the issue I had with Duncan as I realized like the people who were in the offices, even though maybe some of them worked it, they were so detached from reality from the workers that the way they would talk to them was very condescending and just kind of like and I mentioned that to them at one point, like you guys are detached from the workers. They don't really care for you because you're coming off as
Superior.
yeah, and it's like maybe you should do the work sometimes to kind of like know what they're going through, So I don't think I'll ever be. I would like to be in that situation though, where I could be like, you know what, I'm gonna take the day off, or I'm gonna go on vacation, or whatever. I'd like to eventually get to that point. But yeah.
Would you say that's one of your biggest strengths too? Like being a worker and willing to just be here and do the hard stuff?
Yeah, but I think it comes with. I think there's downsides to that, right? I think everything's a balance, right?
Because then the cost is all the other back end stuff that probably needs to be done.
Like, yeah, there's times I'll find myself working so much, then I realize, oh shit, all this stuff that I have to get done, or even just growing the business. If sending out an email or doing some sort of marketing thing, like sometimes that kind of gets tossed to the side. So I think everything's a balance. You don't want to be the owner that's just got a suit on and is just sitting up front and just bullshitting with guests, and like you want to be able to do both. You want to be able to get
Right. It's so hard to decide what to work on.
Yeah.
When you have a business that has so many needs at the moment, because it's not like so incredibly well established, and even those well established things have to keep redoing stuff to keep up the maintenance and keep profitability. And then when you're a relatively young business like all three of us, there's so much to do, and you're like, where do I even start? Sometimes it's not clear.
Yeah, because you don't know. Like when I was at Dunkin', we would be very busy from like 5 a.m. to like 9 a.m. It was 3-4 hours jam packed. That's where all the business came in. So it makes it a little bit easier. You know every single day. You know what your minimum sales are going to be. You know when you're going to be busy, and then you also knew when you were going to be slow. So you knew, all right, come 11 o'clock, I know we're going to be slow, and you could go get X, Y, Z done. Here, or even your guys' case, like you don't know. Like you could open up and it could be slow for 3 hours, then all of a sudden you get hit for an hour, and sometimes it's busy at 2 o'clock, sometimes it's busy at 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So it's like you have to be ready at all times, but then you're trying to get side work done. How do you get that side work done when there's unpredictable? It's just.
To Joey's original question, though, I kind of co-opted about scheduling. How do you schedule? But is it to people's strengths and their roles? No, that's my fault. But because I was curious, but because like you can do everything, Anderson can do everything, Camille can do everything. Right? Yeah. But also that puts a burden on maybe the three of you. I mean, at least there's three of you now that can do that, but you don't, your barista or your cashier isn't going to come in until you probably need them, right? And stuff like that.
So yeah, like right now we're pretty much functioning on a 3-person operation, and how we're setting it up is we have a front person, a back person, and then that third person has to have some level of versatility. And then in some cases, it's all 3 people that have versatility, to where it's just, the one day we were working and we were literally just kind of all rotating throughout the whole place, from the registers to the pizza to salads, whatever, which is awesome. So what I think I've learned over the years, and I actually learned this from one of our customers who owns a UPS store, and it's something so stupid. I would always kind of try to schedule, and I had my full-time people and I had my part-time people, and most of the part-time people are students. And I would always schedule where it's like, all right, I'm going to try to give everybody hours. So even the part-time kids who don't have availability, I was always trying to get them hours. And sometimes it would be at my expense, right? Because I'm trying to take care of everybody, or it might be even at the expense of the full-time person, maybe cutting their hours a little bit. And it's like, why? Like, so when I was talking to a customer, like I said, who has a UPS store, he's like, he prioritizes the full-time people, and then the part-time people. If you have limited availability, you have limited availability. If you're not going to give me an open availability and the ability to work full-time, you can't expect me to give you guaranteed hours. Right. So I take care of them, and then the part-timers, if there's something there, great. If not. And that's kind of more my mindset now. It's like I have 2 full-time workers here besides me. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. I'm going to make sure that they're happy. And then everybody else, it's all right. If I don't have a need for you, I don't have a need for you. But even then, and not to say like the people who I have on board, they're still getting what they want. They're still getting, like, most of the students are like 2 days a week. I'm giving them 2 days a week. But if there's a week where I have to cut hours, I'm going to cut theirs, not the full-time people. Right. Whereas before I never did that. Or I would cut mine, or cut my pay to like. Right. And that's just where it's just. That's the other thing too. Right? You try to be kind, and it's like it bites you in the ass.
We hear a lot about that stuff too. Is like, because we know the feeling of not being able to pay yourself 100%, And then we also know the feeling of you could pay yourself, but you're not, you know, and it's a business that has real expenses. And if you're working for it, you are an expense. So you're supposed to pay yourself.
Yes.
And it's such a like, I want the business to survive and grow versus I need also money, right? So, so what's some of the best advice you've ever received, whether that's personally, business related?
Just an example. Trying to think. I mean, I'm sure there was some good advice I got at some point, but I don't know if I remembered it. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah.
No worries. How about advice that you would give to somebody starting a business? And I'll like precurse that with none of us have ever started a business from scratch, I don't think, before what we're doing right now. And neither of us ever worked in that arena. Well, you like food at Dunkin', like you worked in that type of industry, but when it comes to this, like pizza specific, you didn't have prior experience and you started the business. We didn't have prior experience really with food. We started the business. So you don't need to have the experience to start the business. It might make it a lot harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. So given like that too, what would you tell someone who's going to start a business or considering it?
One, you better love it. Like I think sometimes people want to be like, oh, I'm going to start a business because I want to make a bunch of money. It's I think there's people. I think especially in the restaurant industry, I think there's people who they look at a restaurant if they see restaurants busy, and I'm not saying it's us because but sometimes you walk into a restaurant, you see it's busy, and I think there's some people they're like, oh my god, they got to be making so much money, and they immediately like that's what they're thinking about, how much money they're making, and they're not aware of all the other costs. They're not aware of you got pest control, you got waste, you got all the cleaning supplies, you got insurance. Like they're not factoring that in. So they just go and they see a restaurant packed and they're making all this money and then they want to open it. I think a lot of people have opened up restaurants or bars because
They see money.
they see money. Or a lot of people open up bars because they want to I'm going to open up a bar that I would like to hang out at.
I also think people see a small sample size of the total picture. Whereas, like, when you're here eating and there's other people here eating and it looks busy, well, you came at a time that most other humans would also come. And so it tends to be busy at that time.
Yeah.
You're out on a, Saturday afternoon watching college football. Well, that's a popular thing to go to a bar for, and there are other people here. But what about every other day where you're not seeing that same sample of money being made as well? And then all of the liability, supplies, expenses, logistics, everything that goes into it. So
As a rule of thumb, I don't like to count other people's money that I don't know. Like you don't know, so it's the same thing with the business. You don't know.
Right.
You
can see potential.
There are businesses that you could see every single table filled, and they might need every single table filled the entire day in order for them to make money.
Right.
But on the outside, you're thinking, wow, how much money they're making. So I think anything, if you're going to do a business, you have to love it, and then you also have to be willing to put in the work. I think sometimes people think, oh, I'm gonna do a business because I want to be my own boss, and they think being their own boss is
The vacations.
working whenever the fuck you want. And you could be that. There are people who do that, right? And some of them are probably really good, and there's some who are assholes and they're taking advantage of people, and yeah, they are going on vacations or whatever. But it's not a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Be prepared for, especially if you're a restaurant, be prepared for 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-hour days. And you better be ready for that. And if you're not, don't do it.
do you see this business as the end goal for yourself? Like, would you be doing this for the next 30 years, or do you imagine another business down the road? In other words, is there something else you also love?
I've always said, so my parents, we had where Gio's was our place. So when I was young, I'd like to be in that. And then when I got to like 17, 18 years old, I was like, I'm over this. I never want to be in this again. And then I left. I went to school. I went to journalism school, and I got into media. And I was building websites. I was doing flyers. I was doing podcasting. I was doing all these things, and that's what I wanted to do. And then when the economy crashed and I got like laid off and I lost that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna pivot to something else. So I started doing other stuff. And then I was doing the park for a time being, and for a while, I was like, all right, this is what I'm gonna do. Like maybe I could make this into a business, especially when I was doing the fields. And I was like, okay, maybe this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. But then I was like, okay, no, you kind of get over that. I think there was always a study done where you ask somebody, where do you see yourself? I think that what the question is where do you see yourself in, do you see yourself being a different person in 5 years? And do you compare yourself today to who you were 5 years ago? And most people, when they compare themselves to who they are today to 5 years ago, they say they're different. But when they look to the future, they think they're going to be the same. And it's no, if you were different 5 years ago, you're probably going to be different in 5 years. So your habits and your passions are going to most likely change. I would like to say I would be doing this for the rest of my life, but I think that you can't do that because you don't know. I love doing this now, but maybe in 5 years, you don't fucking know. I mean, I went from the restaurant business to building fucking websites, back into, coaching to back into food. It's you have to have a very open mind, and it's in life, right? You can't. It's fucking life.
I think ideally the goal would be to get to that point of having a choice to work here or not. And then maybe at that point you're thinking about starting something else in addition to this, or having the opportunity to choose other things you might want to engage in.
Say similar to that is having that choice and having that freedom, but then also say this, it blows up and expands, it's all good, you're growing, and then it's well, a second location, say it's completely viable, and it's all assumed, but you can't be in two places at once. Okay, well, Anderson runs one location, but do you feel oh, but I can't see what's going on there, or I'm not helping with the dough there, stuff like that?
No, I think that would be the hardest thing. Right. That would be the hardest thing, is I would have to, and that's why I don't think I don't know if I would ever be able to do that. Yeah. I don't know.
Never mind the possibility of it, right?
Yeah, I don't think I would even ever, I don't know. Yeah. I think I would rather just grow this to as much as, because I think a lot of people do that though. A lot of people go, they have a restaurant, it does well, and because the restaurant, the margins are so low, I think people just think, okay, if I'm only going to make 5% profit, I have to then open up 10 locations, and if I can make 5% off each one, I can be making real money. But I don't know. I mean, I think there's also a huge risk that the second location you open up fails, or is not going to run as well as that first location, or maybe it does, and then the first location falls. And I've been to places, other pizza places that, I went there when they had one location, and then you go there when they have 3 locations, and you see the quality drop off. And even if all those locations are doing well, I know me personally, I wouldn't be able to live with myself knowing that if I have 3 locations and there's a drop off in quality or drop off in service, I wouldn't be able to live with myself knowing that I'm kind of cheating the customer. It's and it's you should be able to, especially if you're an individual owner. If you have investors and it's a big company, it's different, right? If you're a big restaurant group, you want to open up as many places as possible. But if you're an individual owner, and you're able to make money in one location and kind of build off that, I don't know. To me, going into other locations just seems kind of foolish. And
it's like having a thriving restaurant and then having a bunch of food trucks for no reason, right? It's like what we talk about. We're how does it make sense?
No. Yeah.
All right, that's all we got.
There you go.
Mario, appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.